All right. I had to do some search. Okay, look, it looks upside down, but it's not. I'm reading it right side up. The man's ragged breathing echoed off the condensation-covered pipes that ran along both corridor walls. His exhalations producing a small cloud of mist around his head. A dismal, solitary yellow glow strip illuminated his freshly shaven face from the ceiling, bathing it in a sickly light. He glanced back nervously, bent double, catching his breath, hands resting on his knees. A flicker of movement in the distant shadows caught his attention, and he gritted his teeth and started running again, pulling a stubby pistol from inside his blue coveralls. The clatter of something hard on metal rang along the corridor floor after him, accompanied by a scratching noise, like rough leather being drawn along the corroded steel of the piping. Emperor's blood! The hunter has become the hunted, he hissed, looking back again. There was a blur of movement under the glow strip, an impression of bluish black and purple dashing along the corridor towards him. He raised the pistol and pulled the trigger, the muzzle flash almost blinding in the dim confines of the passageway. The whine of bullets passed in the dim distance. With preternatural speed, the fast approaching shape leapt aside, bone-colored claws sinking into the rusted metal to pull itself out of the line of fire. The pipes rang with the sound of scraping on metal. As the monster continued its relentless advance, its chase moving effortlessly onto the wall. The man broke into a sprint again. His legs and arms pumped rapidly as he sped down the passageway. His eyes scanned the walls and ceiling as he ran down the twisting corridor, desperately seeking some avenue of escape. He had run another 30 meters, the creature bearing down on him all the while, when he noticed an opening to his right. Jumping through the doorway, his eyes fell on the lockdown switch, which he slammed his fist into. With a hiss, the blast door began to descend rapidly, but a second later it was only halfway down when its inhuman hunter slipped under it. It pulled itself up to its full height, right next to him, dark, alien eyes regarding him menacingly. He blasted randomly at the monstrosity with the pistol as he dived back underneath the door, rolling under its bottom edge and to his feet on the other side. Half a second later, the door slammed shut, sealing off from the ferocious predator. Breathing a deep sigh of relief, he could hear the sound of powerful limbs battering at the other side of the portal, broken by the screech of long claws shredding metal. The noise of the futile assault ceased after a few seconds, replaced by the clicking of claws disappearing along the side tunnel. "Emperor willing, I'll catch you yet," he said with a wry smile to the entity on the other side of the doorway, before he turned and carried on running down the corridor. It is difficult to know just how we will change the world. It's a difficult thing to know, really, how we will change the world. It's almost like an infection. It's almost like an infection, really. It's almost like getting sick, right? You got sick, and you know you're sick, but who got you sick? Did you just get sick randomly? But if somebody got you sick, who? Is there really any way to know who got you sick? I mean, with certain diseases, of course, but something as common as the common cold, there's no way to know unless you've isolated yourself from all human contact on every possible avenue. There's no way to know. The colonel and I approach a sizable bunker complex. 4 or 5 large modules connected by enclosed walkways. The hatchway he leads me to is flanked by 2 of the commissariat provosts. The black plates of their carapace armor slick in the continuing rain. Their look of disgust bites more than the cold wind and bitter rain on my bare flesh. making me fully aware of the pitiful state I'm in. My teeth are chattering with the cold, my naked body chilled with the rain, my feet numb from walking through the puddles and mud barefoot. Half my face is covered in grime from where I slipped over a while ago, and there are scratches along my lower legs from stumbling into a half buried coil of razor wire. I've got my arms clasped tightly across my chest, shivering, trying to keep myself a little bit warmer. The stairs follow me as the colonel opens the door, and the hatchways cycle open, and he waves me inside. A few meters down a short corridor is another door to my left, and at a gesture from the colonel, I open it and step inside. With the small bunk room on the other side of the door are the rest of the last chancers: Linkskrieg, Laurie, Lauren, and Cronin. The colonel told me on the way that after they left me, Gappo managed to find a plasma charge the hard way on a minefield and was scattered liberally over a wide area. That was a blow to hear, though I suspect Gappo would be glad his death warned the others of danger. They looked at me with astonished glances. They've seen me nude before, every day on the ship during the post-exercise ablutions, in fact. But my bedraggled state must be pretty extraordinary. And Saint Festinius went unto the enemy unarmed and unarmored, jokes Cronin, as they all burst out laughing. I stand there humiliated for a second before I find myself joining in the laugh, realizing I must make for a particularly pathetic spectacle. Not that unarmed, I quick back, glancing meaningfully down just past my bare stomach, getting another laugh from them. More of a sidearm than artillery. Oh, this is the Last Chancers. I like this book a lot. I've read it a couple times. I actually have two copies of it just because it's been through so much. This is The Last Chancers, and it is a story of redemption, but unfortunately, sometimes, to be truly redeemed, you have to be a martyr, and that's kind of the point. Is a lot of times, redemption is posthumous because you only get one shot, you only get one last chance. I started reading this book aloud to people, and I was saying that the author isn't a good author, but I now the author is training me to be more like him, and I can see now where he's coming from. And it's not just Lieutenant Cage's last chance. It's the author's last chance too, Gav Thorpe, but it's also my last chance. And some people, not everyone gets a last chance, so I'm going to repeat that phrase again later. I think we all need redemption. I don't know. I see a lot of Lieutenant Cage in myself, and a lot of myself in Lieutenant Cage. It's about, I don't know. It's about being a cowboy, I guess. About being, cowboys weren't all about like dancing and, they're rough. They're tough. They're rough, tough fellas. Yeehaw! It's bad luck not to put new boots on the floor, I say to the provost as he leaves. But I can't tell his reaction past the dark visor of his helmet. Be quiet, Cage, the colonel tells me, nodding with his head to a door leading off the bunk room. Clean up through here and get in on uniform. Inside the small cubicle beyond the door is a small showering unit. I find a hard bristled brush and a misshapen lump of infirmary smelling soap, and a little alcove, and set to scrubbing myself clean under the delusory trickle of cold water that dribbles from the shower head when I work the pump a few times. Cold, but clean and invigorated, I towel myself off back in the bunk room and get dressed, feeling more human than I've done in the past day since I've made my bid for freedom. The colonel's gone again, and the others just sit around with their own thoughts as I ready myself. I knew you weren't dead, Linkskink says when I'm finished, but I figured out what you were up to. Sorry it didn't work out. Thanks anyway, I reply with a shrug. How the hell did the colonel know, though? When we got here, there were some odd reports floating around. The provost told the colonel that a stormtrooper patrol found an enemy infiltration squad dead in their camp about 3 kilometers past the trench line. Nobody was supposed to be in that area, and the colonel said that you were the only one stupid enough to be out there. He left us here and headed off to look for you. Did you kill that squad, Cage? The colonel asked from the doorway, causing us all to glance toward him in surprise. Yes, sir, I tell him, sitting down on the floor and lacing up my boots. I'm glad I did, even though it helped you catch me. This whole place might be swarming with rebels otherwise. He just nods and grunts in a non-committal fashion. I have someone new for you all to meet, he says after another moment, standing to one side and waving somebody through the door. The man who steps through is swathed in a dark purple robe, a skull and cog emblem embroidered in silver onto the top of the hood over his head, instantly identifying him as a tech priest of the cult Mechanicus. This is Adept Gudsmans. Lately from the forge world of Fractrix, the colonel introduces him. To save tiresome speculation on your part, I will tell you now that he is with us for supplying Imperial armaments to pirates raiding Navy convoys. A most extreme abuse of his position. I am sure you will agree. Goodmans shuffles towards us, pulling back his hood to reveal a tired, withered face. His scalp is bald. Puckered scars across his head show where implants have recently been removed. His eyes are rheumy, and he looks at us listlessly. I can hear his breath as ragged and strained. Make him feel welcome, the colonel adds. I will be back shortly. With the colonel gone, we get down to the serious business of questioning our latest recruit. Bit of a bad deal for you, says Linkskrieg, slouching nonchalantly along a bed at the far end of the bunk room. Better than the alternative, Gudsmans replies with a grimace, easing himself cautiously down to the other bunks, his voice a grating, labored whisper. You look completely done in, I say, looking at his tired, frail form. I am 286, he wheezes back sadly, head hung low. They took my enhancements away, and without regular doses of anti-agioptic oils, I'll suffer increasing dysfunctions within the next month, owing to a lack of maintenance. Yeah, redemption is the theme here, and of course, I have something to be redeemed about. It's it's all about attention spans, my friend. If I get carried away in the magical dream of life, then I forget about my own redemption. With the same deliberation, he tips his hand over, the scraps of parchment fluttering to the floor around his boots. He treads on the pieces, twisting his foot on top of them to scrunch them up and tear them even more. We watch this in horrified silence, and to me, it's like he's torn up and scuffed out Linkskrieg. Oh man, I'm afraid I skipped a page. Yeah, I just skipped a page. Keep your eye on the ball, Joseph. We sit there absorbing this information for a moment before Lauren breaks our contemplation. I think I just prefer to be hanged and get it over with, he says, shaking his head in amazement. They would have not hanged me, young man, the tech priest tells him, his eyes suddenly sharp and aware as he looks at each of us in turn. My masters would have had me altered to be a servitor. I would have had my memories scrubbed. My biological components would be permanently interfaced into some menial control system or similar. I would be cogitating, but not alive, simply existing. I would know in my subconsciousness that I am a living, breathing thing, but also denied the ultimate synthesis with the machine God. Not truly alive and not truly dead. That is the usual punishment for betraying the great Adeptus Mechanicus. Your colonel must have some good influence to deny the cult Mechanicus its vengeance. Don't I know it? Linkskrieg says bitterly. Further questions are interrupted by the colonel's reappearance, accompanied by the scribe I'd seen several times in the chamber aboard the Pride of Lothos. Clericus Amadeo. Amadeo is carrying a bundle of scrolls, which I immediately recognize as the pardons the colonel has shown me before. And now you all learn what I really intend for you, says the colonel gravely, taking the pardons and placing them on the bunk next to Lauren. Everybody's eyes lock to them as he walks across the room to the door. This is the time when your career in the Last Chancers will be over, one way or another. There's a tangible change to the atmosphere inside the bunk room as everybody draws their breath at the same time. If I'm hearing right, and the reactions of the other Last Chancers suggest I am, the Colonel has just told us we can get out of the 13th Penal Legion. Those, the Colonel continues, jabbing a finger towards a pile of parchments, are imperial pardons for each and every one of you. I will sign and seal them once we have completed our final mission. You can refuse, in which case the provost will take you to another penal legion. And the heretic priests of Illidan came forth, bringing false images for the praise of the lost people, Cronin says, frowning hard. What? Says the colonel, taken aback by the madman's statement. He means this is far too simple, translates Lori. I know what she means. The offer seems too good to be true. And then I understand it isn't. That I know what the colonel has in mind. You were serious when you said we're going to coronate him. Corrada Norum. I say slowly, making sure the other Last Chancers understand the statement. Of course I was serious, Cage, the colonel answers brusquely. Why would I not be serious? Well, puts in Linkskrieg leaning forward, there is the small matter that Court Norum is the most impregnable citadel in the sector, the most unassailable fortress for a month's warp travel in every direction. No citadel is impregnable, the colonel replies, radiating self-confidence and sincerity. The fact that 500,000 Imperial Guard backed up by the Imperial Navy haven't been able to break the place doesn't vex you? Blurts out Linkskrieg, highly perturbed by what the colonel is proposing. We shall not be storming Court Norum. That would be ridiculous, the colonel tells us with an irritated voice. We shall be infiltrating the complex and rendering it inoperable from inside. Assuming you can get us inside, which is a hell of an assumption, there's about 3 million people living in that city. We're bound to be discovered, frag. I wouldn't even be able to hide among people on my own side. Then we shall endeavor to do better than recent exploits, the colonel replies curtly, obviously getting impatient with our reluctance. Make your decisions now. Are you coming with me, or do I transfer you? Count me out, Linkskrieg says empathetically, shaking his head vehemently. When he continues, he looks at each of us in turn, forcing himself to speak slowly and surely. This is so insane, so reckless. It's unbelievable. It's sheer suicide trying to attack Court Norum with 7 people? I am going to survive this and get my barony back. And marching into the middle of a strongly held rebel fortress is not going to help me do that. Do what you will. I'm not going along with this suicide squad. Very well, the colonel says calmly, strolling over to the bed with the pardons on it. He swords through them for a moment, finds Lynxkriegs, and holds it up for us to all to see. Then, slowly and deliberately, he begins to tear it up. He tears it lengthways down the middle, and then puts 2 of the halves together and tears it across the width. He does this a couple of times until 16 ragged pieces nestle in his hand. With the same deliberation, he tips his hand over, and the scraps of parchment fluttering to the floor around his boots. He treads on the pieces, twisting his foot on the top of them to scrunch them and tear them even more. We watch this in horrified silence, and to me it's like he's torn up and scuffed out Lynxkrieg. He bends over and picks up another pardon, holding it up for us to see. I read my name across the top, and my heart flutters. Lynxkrieg has a good point. The whole idea of going to Court Norum is suicidal. I have a philosophy about staying alive, and that's to do it for as long as possible. Going into the enemy fort isn't going to help that at all. But for all this, that's my life. And the colonel has it gripped between his thumb and finger. If I say yes and I survive this ridiculous mission, I'll be free. I'll be able to do whatever I want. Stay in the guard, possibly. Make a home for myself here on Typhus Prime. Or perhaps be able to work my way to where I was born, on Olympus. If I survive. The colonel looks at me with those ice shards he has for eyes, an expectant expression on his face. I know all about the pain, misery, and danger I've been through in the last 3 years, and consider the whole of my life being like that. I can tell that this is the only chance I've got to get out of the penal legions. If I'm transferred, I'm dead sooner or later. That'll be the whole of my fate, for perhaps another 3 years if I'm lucky. Just more wars and death and wondering whether the next bullet or last round will be my next. Perhaps I'll end up like Cronin, head snapped with the enormity of my destiny. And will there be someone around to watch me the same way I look out for Cronin? Maybe, maybe not. But do I want to risk it? One choice, almost certain death. But the chance for freedom. The other choice, death, almost a certainty, and no escape. I had my best bid for getting out the easy way here on Typhus Prime. And that wasn't good enough. And besides, do I really want to spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have done it the proper way? All these thoughts are swirling around in my head. At the speed of a lasbolt, everyone seems to be caught in some kind of stasis loop around me, the universe pausing in its slow life to let me make my decision. And through it all, there's a reoccurring voice at the back of my head. You're an Imperial Guardsman, it says. This is the chance to prove yourself, it tells me. This is where you show them all that you're worth something. This is where the colonel sees what kind of man you are. A man, it repeats, not a criminal scumbag. I'm in, Colonel. I hear myself saying, my mind feeling like it's floating around a hand's breadth above my head, letting the other part take control for the moment. The others give their answers, but I don't register what they actually say. My mind is still racing around and around, trying to catch up with itself. I hear Gudmans muttering about how dying in Court Norum will be a release for him. Then, with a slamming sensation of my consciousness, I come back home. If I survive this, I'm free to walk away. I have no doubt that the colonel will keep his promise. All I need to do is survive one more mission, one more battle. Okay, it's Court Norum, but I've been through some real crap lately, and I'm still here. Who knows? This could be easy in comparison if the colonel's got it right. With this realization seeping through my thoughts, I managed to turn my attention to the others. There's still only one torn up parchment on the floor, so that means all the others accepted as well. They're looking at me, including the colonel, and I realized someone was speaking to me, but I hadn't heard them. My mind was so engrossed in my own thoughts. What? I say, forcing myself to think straight. It's going to be essential to think clearly if I'm going to get to see my pardon again. We said that we are going with you, not the colonel, repeats Laurie, looking encouragingly at me. What? I snap angrily because I'm confused. What the hell does that mean? It means that if you think we can make it, we're willing to try, Lauren explains. His face, a picture of sincerity. Okay then, guardsmen, the colonel says. We move out at nightfall. You have 2 hours to prepare yourselves. The storm seems to be passing, the thunder rumbling away to be replaced by the roar of distant artillery batteries. We're sitting on a rocky hillock, about 800 meters past the current Imperial trench line, as far as I can tell. A plain stretches out for a few kilometers in front of us, swarming with rebels. It seems to be a kind of staging area, the open ground buzzing with activity. In the distance, I can make out a sally port, that of Court Norham. 2 gatehouses flank a big armored portal dug into an outcrop of rock by the mountain into which most of the citadel is dug. It's that mountain that makes it so easy to defend, rendering it impervious to all but the most sustained and concentrated orbital bombardment. Who knows how deep its lowest levels go? There are parts above ground with rings of concentric curtain walls, 8 meters thick, and constructed of bonded plasteel and rockcrete, making it hard to damage with shells and energy weapons. Their slanted shape designed to deflect towards the dead ground between them. That open space is a killing ground too, left clear and smooth to give no cover for any foe fortunate enough to get over the walls. I can see why 500,000 guardsmen have thrown themselves against the bastion of defiance with no effect. I'm distracted as a cluster of star shells soar to the air over to the west, to our left, exploding in a blast of yellow blossoms. That is the signal we have been awaiting, the colonel says from where he stood on the lip of the abandoned rebel trench. The fighting's moved away from this area now, and the communications trench along this ridgeline gives us perfect cover from the scrutiny of Court Norm's defenders. The forces being assembled before us are probably ready for a push along the southern flank of the Imperial line, hoping perhaps to turn the end of the line and pin a large part of the Emperor's troops between this sally and the walls of Court Norham. The divisionary attack will have begun, the colonel informs us, flicking shut the case of a gold chronometer that he had procured from the commissariat. Before we left to the relay outpost, he'd given us our ultimatum. Placing the timer into a deep pocket of his greatcoat, he looks around, seemingly at ease. Very at ease, actually, considering this is the most important and riskiest mission we've ever been involved in. The sound of small stones skittering over the rocks above us gets everyone swinging around with our weapons raised, except the colonel, who still stood there, gazing towards Court Norham. Good evening, Lieutenant Stryden, the colonel says, without looking, and we see a young man scrabbling down from the ridgeline, his thin face split with a wide grin. Good to see you, Colonel Schaefer, the man says pleasantly, nodding politely in greeting to each of us as well. He's swathed head to foot in an elaborate camouflage cape, patterned to blend in almost perfectly with the gray-brown rocks of the hills around Court Norham. He jumps over the narrow trench to stand next to the colonel, the cape fluttering around him. Now, Colonel Schaefer? Stryden asks excitedly. When you are ready, Lieutenant Stryden, the colonel affirms with a nod. What's happening, sir? Laurie asks, looking suspiciously at Stryden. Lieutenant Stryden is going to call down some fire on these rebels to clear a path to the sally port, the colonel replies, dropping down to the trench. You're going to need some big guns to shift that lot, I say to the lieutenant. He turns his permanent grin towards me. Oh, well, we have some very large ordnance, Mr. Cage, he says, pulling a complex looking device from beneath his cape. He squats down and opens up a shutter in the fist sized box, holding it up to his eye. His fingers travel back and forth along a row of knobs down the side of what is evidently a rangefinder or something, making small adjustments. Pulling the box away from his face, Dryden looks down, and I see a series of numbers and letters displayed on a digipanel. He nods with a satisfied look, and then looks upwards to the cloud-filled night sky. Wind south-southwest, wouldn't you say, Mr. Cage? He says suddenly. Wind, I blurt back, taken completely by surprise at this unusual question. Yes, he says, glancing at me with a smile, and it looks as if there's a counter-cyclic at about 6,000 meters. Your guns must lob their shells a hell of a long way for that to matter. Oh, no. They don't go up at all. They just come down, he replies amiably, pressing a stud on the bottom of the gadget and holding it above his head. Doesn't go up, murmurs Gudmans. This is coming from orbit? That's right, Stryden affirms with a nod. I'm ground observation officer for the battleship Emperor's Benevolence. She'll be opening fire shortly. A battleship? I say incredulously. My mind fills with memories of the cruiser that was with us in the Kragner system, the rows of massive guns along her broadside. Emperor knows how much firepower a battleship has. Here it comes, Stryden says happily, directing our eyes upwards with his own gaze. The sky above Court Norm begins to brighten, and a moment later I can see the fiery trails of 10 missiles streaking groundwards. As they approach, movement on the ground attracts my attention, as the rebels begin to scurry around in panic when they realize what's happening. With a vast, thunderous roar, the torpedo warheads impact into the plane, and a ripple of explosions, at least 50 meters across, tears through the assembled traitors, tossing tanks 30 or more meters into the air with great balls of fire. I don't see any bodies flung around, and I assume men are completely incinerated. The ground is engulfed in a raging inferno, and then the blast wave hits us from a kilometer away, causing the Navy officer's cape to flutter madly as the blast of hot air sweeps over our face, stinging my eyes. The air itself seems to burn for a few seconds, blossoms of secondary explosions filling the skies. Stryden taps me on the arm and nods upwards, and I can just make out a series of streaks in the air, reflecting the light of the flames around Port Norham. The colonel climbs out of the trench to watch, his eyes glittering red from the burning plane. The shell's impacts are even more devastating than the torpedo fire, as they explode in 4 parallel lines towards us, each one ripping up great gouts of earth and hurling men and machines in all directions. The roar of the detonations drowns out their screams and the screech of sheared metal. The blast from the shells extinguishes the murderous fires from the plasma warheads. A black pall of smoke drifts into the night sky, silhouetted against the twinkling lights of distant windows around Court Norham. The salvo continues, numerous explosions creeping closer towards us across the plain. For a full minute, the shells impact nearer and nearer, and I start to worry I'll go deaf with this intense, continuous pounding in my ears. This is replaced by a more urgent fear as the bombardment carries on for a second minute, and it seems as if the battleship has gone too far. When the shells start exploding at the bottom of the ridgeline and keep coming, panic grips us, and everybody starts hurling themselves into the trench. As the bombardment continues, I begin to fear for my life. I wouldn't trust ground artillery to shell that close to me, never mind a battleship more than 100 kilometers above my head. The colonel jumps in after us, a concerned look on his face, but Stryden just stands there on the lip, gazing in raptured awe as the devastation approaches. Rock splinters are hurled in the sky by an explosion no more than 50 meters away, and in the bright glare of the detonation, I see Stryden raising his arms above his head, and I just make out a shrill laughter over the tumult of the barrage. His cape is almost being ripped by his shoulders from the successive blast waves, but he stands there as solid as a rock. Then everything goes silent and dark, my ears and eyes useless for a few seconds, as they adjust to the sudden lack of violent stimuli. Striden's just laughing like a madman, and the colonel gives a scowl and brushes down his coat before climbing out of the trench. The Navy lieutenant drops his hands to his knees and looks back over his shoulders, his eyes wide with excitement. Emperor, help me. It doesn't matter how many times I see that, Mr. Cage. I still get a tingle watching it, he exclaims passionately, bright teeth showing in the darkness. Well, that was a little fragging close, I shouted him, pulling myself up over the rim of the trench and striding over to him. Orders, I'm afraid, he says unapologetically. Usually we'd bracket out a target first to make sure of our positioning, but we weren't allowed to do that this time. This time we're here, so we don't want anything unfriendly dropping on us now, do we? And we were requested to miss the gatehouses too, which is a bit strange, but orders is orders. There's no need to worry, though. We've had quite a lot of practice at this. I guess we won't be able to get out of if the gates are fused to molten lump, says Laurie, vaulting gracefully over the top few rungs of the ladder out of the trench. I survey the scene as it is now. Not even 5 minutes have passed since the star shells went up. The plains are pocket-marked with hundreds of craters, and at a rough guess from here, with my eyes still reeling, I can just about make out some tangled heaps of wreckage scattered around. For about 6 kilometers in every direction, the plain has been bodily ripped up and dumped back down again. A haze of smoke floats a meter or so above the ground, dispersing slowly in the sluggish wind. The tang of burnt shell powder is almost asphyxiating. The air is thick with it. Nothing could have survived that. Nothing that ever walked, crawled, or was driven across the face of a world, at least. Going inside? Says Stryden suddenly, Laurie's words filtering over his overexcited mind. Emperor's throne. That sounds damned exciting. More exciting than standing here waiting for my next target orders. Mind if I join you? What? I exclaim. Have you totally lost it? He gives me a pleasant smile, then he looks towards Court Norum, eyes staring with fascination. He can come, I hear the colonel say heavily from where he stands, further down the ridge, looking at the devastation wrought by the Emperor's benevolence. I can tell that even he's impressed by the magnitude of the slaughter. There must have been near 10,000 men down there a few minutes ago, and upwards of 100 tanks. Now, there's nothing. I do not think we could stop him, in fact, says the colonel meaningfully. I understand what he's saying. Stryden will follow us anyway, and short of killing him, which the Navy won't appreciate one little bit, there's nothing we can do. I'm gonna go find my vape. I'm gonna go find my vape. Don't have my vape, and that's not great. I'm gonna go find my fucking vape. Find my fucking vape. Find my vape, vape. Find my vape, vape. Can I find my vape, vape? Wouldn't that be great, if I found my fucking vape? Where's my fucking vape? Honey, what did you do with my vape? I forgot. I don't live with anyone. There's no one to call honey here. Red is a great color for a vape. So in the squad, in Lieutenant Cage's little platoon, or I guess it's more of a squad, we have Lieutenant Cage, and he's the main character. He's a badass, but he's like a criminal. He's not a good guy. He's kind of like that guy from Pulp Fiction, John Travolta. He's like badass, but he's not a good guy. You still love him though. So there's Lieutenant Cage. There's Colonel Schaefer, who's like, and Colonel Schaefer, he talks like this. He's in charge of them, and he's basically unkillable. That's his power, is he just doesn't die. He's more powerful than Cage. There's Lieutenant Stridon that just joined them. He is just an observer. He's not actually like a badass. He's just a guy. But he called in that entire artillery bombardment. There's Lori and Lauren, and they are brother and sister. They're genetic like clones. They're badasses, but the thing about them is there's two of them. That's basically one character, but there's two of them. You know, a male and a female. And then there's Linkskrieg, I think. I think that's everyone in the squad, just 6 people. Oh no, there's one more. There's one more guy. Cronin, did I say Linkskrieg? Linkskrieg left, so he's gone. But Cronin, he speaks. He got locked inside this chapel, and this really bad attack happened. So he speaks like from scripture now, which is kind of cool. And then there's Gudmans, and Gudmans talks like this. Gudmans is stuck in the Last Chancers because I don't remember what he did. I think it just said what he did. But he's gonna die soon, anyways. So that, he's gonna die. He's like he's a cyborg, but he's going to die. And so he knows no matter what, he's gonna die. Linkskrieg left, and they're about to figure out what happened to him. But basically, out of the 4,000 Last Chancers, now there's just like half a dozen of them. And the whole point of whittling down that army was just basically for this mission. Because sometimes, 4 is more than 4,000. All it takes is a few good men. I stepped through the small portal into the left watchtower, with lasgun ready. When I'm inside, I understand how the colonel could lead us through the gate with such confidence. Inside the tower, men and women are strewn haphazardly across the floor, and up the spiral stairs, their faces blue, contorted by paroxysms of death. Airborne toxin, I suspect. Airborne toxin, I suspect, mutters Gudmans, peering closely at one of the bodies. A young woman, perhaps 20 years old, dressed in a Typhos sergeant's uniform. From where? Stridon voices the question that had just popped out into my head. Keep moving, the colonel orders from further up the stairwell. When we reach the top, the whole upper level is a single chamber. There are gun slits all around, and a few in-place autocannons, their crews lying dead beside the guns. Gudmans! The colonel attracts the tech priest's attention and nods towards a terminal on the inner wall. Facing away from the gate, the tech priest lurches over and leans against the wall. He reaches up and pulls something from behind his ear. It's like a small plug, the size of a thumbnail, and he pulls it further. I see a glistening wire stretching between it and Gudman's head. Punching a few runes on the terminal, he inserts the plug into a recess in the middle of the contraption, and he closes his eyes. The display screen flickers to life, throwing a green glow onto the aging tech priest's craggy features. A succession of images flickers across the screen, too quick to see each one individually, but giving an overall impression of a map or blueprints. Then a lot of numbers scroll up again, too fast to read. A succession of digits that barely appears before they are replaced by new data. With a grunt, Gudman steps back, the plug ejected from the port, and whipping back into his skull. Just as well that I checked, he tells the colonel. They have changed some of the security protocols in the inner areas and remapped the plasma chamber access passages. You have a map of this place? Asks Lori in amazement. How can you remember all that information? This place is over 40 kilometers across. Subcutaneous cerebral mammogram, Gudman replies, tapping an area of the skull just above the right ear. They did not take all of my implants. I'm not going to even pretend I understood a word of that, I butt in. But I take it you have an exact copy of the latest schematics in your head now? That is correct, he affirms with a single nod before pulling his hood over his head. I turn to the colonel. He mentioned plasma chambers, Colonel. What are we actually going to do here? Court Norum is run by 3 plasma reactors, he explains as everyone else gathers around. We will get into the primary generators and disable them. Every system, every defense screen, incited energy weapon, as well as many of the major bombardment turrets, are linked to that power system. I can see that, agrees Lauren. But how do we get in? The colonel simply points to the nearest body. Getting into the next circle is going to be harder, Gudmans warns the colonel. With our stolen uniforms, chosen to fit us better than my scrappy attempt with the Mordian outfit, getting around hasn't been too difficult. Everyone seems to take it for granted when an officer and a bunch of guardsmen accompanied by a tech priest walk past. There's a war been going on for about 2 years now. I suspect the security is a bit lax. After all, nobody would be stupid enough to come in here without an army. Except us, of course. With their extraordinary hair concealed beneath Typhon guard helmets, and their faces partially obscured by the high collars of the blue jackets, even Laurie and Lauren have gone unnoticed. I'm not sure what uniform the colonel procured for himself, but it seems to be one that makes Typhons look the other way, lest they attract his attention. It's black without any decoration at all, and I wonder if isn't some local branch of the commissariat. Even in stolen clothes, he's managed to come up as someone everyone else is scared stiff of. Typical. With his camel cape discarded, Shryden is revealed as a skinny young man of about 20, almost painful in his lankiness, though he doesn't walk around with the gawkishness you might reasonably expect. I'm beginning to understand even more now about how impossible it would be to take Court Nordham by open attack. Even if a sizable enough force could gain access, the layout of the lower levels is roughly circular, a series of 4 concentric rings, according to Gudmans. Each is only linked to the next by a single access tunnel, which are on the opposite sides of each ring, so that to get from one ring to the next, you have to get around half the circumference of the ring. The builders even made the air ducts and power conduits circular, so there's no quick route around there either. It's taken us a day and a half just to get around the outer circle. We grabbed a few hours sleep in an empty barracks block during the morning, but it's about midday now, and we're in a small chamber leading off from the passageway that goes to the next security gate. What do we need to do? Asks Schaefer, dragging a chair from behind a chrome desk and sitting down. The plain white room is bare except for the desk and chair, obviously disused now. We have to get one of the security officers, a senior one, I mean, Gudmans tells us. The colonel looks over at where I'm lounging against the wall. Cage, take Laurie and get me a senior security officer, he says, as calmly as if asking me to pop out and get him some fresh boot polish. Laurie and I exchange glances and head out of the door. The corridor smells faintly of disinfectant and gleams brightly from a recent cleaning. The main tunnel is quite... Oh, gosh. The main tunnel is quite high and wide. Its rhombic cross-section, 5 meters tall and 10 meters wide at the base, with gradually sloping walls. Every surface is sheared in shining metal panels, like steel planks, riveted onto the naked rock. A few people go this way and that, paying us no attention at all. Most of them are guardsmen, but the odd administrative scribe goes past now and then. Laurie and I wander along the corridor, a bit until we come to a junction, much narrower and leading off in a curve to our right. We lean against the wall and start chatting, eyes looking over each other's shoulders for a sign of someone who might be the sort of man we're looking for. To everyone else, it looks like we're loafing, merely off-duty guardsmen passing time. Do you think we can pull this off? Laurie asks, keeping her voice low. A gentle purr, in fact. If anyone can, it's us, I assure her. scratching at an itch on my thigh, caused by the coarse material of the white Typhon trousers. It's not going to be easy taking this place, even with the power down, she says. I've been thinking about that. And I don't think there'll be anything to tank after we're done, I reply, voicing a suspicion that's been growing in my mind since the colonel outlined his plan. I don't get you, she says with a little frown creasing her white eyebrows. This idea about getting to the plasma chambers and shutting them down. I start but fall silent when she gives me an urgent glance and then flicks her gaze over my shoulders along the main corridor behind me. I push myself off the wall and glance back. Walking towards us are 3 men, 2 of them in security uniforms. Deep blue jumpsuits, metal batons hanging off their leather belts, peaked caps instead of helmets. The man between the 2 security officials wears a similar outfit, but with red piping running the length of his sleeves and legs. He carries a short cane under one arm, like a drill sergeant, I guess. And his stern demeanor shows that he's nobody to mess with. As they walk past, we fall in step a few meters behind them. I slip a short-bladed knife into my hand, procured from a kitchen we raided for food last night, and we quicken our step. Looking around to check that we're alone, we make our move. The security man on the right, in front of me, hears my footsteps and turns. Lori and I pounce at him at the same time, my knife slamming into the eye of the one who's looking back at us. Lori wraps her arms around the head and neck of the other, like a snake. And with one violent twist and a hideous cracking noise, she snaps his neck in 2. The officer reacts quickly, lashing out at me with his cane. It just brushes my left arm, but it must be charged or something because it sends a shock of pain up to my shoulder. Lori's in too fast for him to get a second blow, bringing her knee into the elbow of his outstretched arm and chopping down on his wrist with her right hand, breaking his arm and sending the cane clanging to the floor. He gives a shout of agony, and Lori brings her left arm sharply back, slamming the outside edge of her hand across his nose, snapping his head back. His legs buckle as blood streams down his face, and she lashes out at me with a kick that connects with his chin and poleaxes him to the ground, completely out of it. We're just recovering our breath, wondering what to do next, when from the next corridor appears a clericus, staring intently at an open scroll in his hands. Frag, I spit, and he looks up, eyes widen comically, as he sees the 2 of us crouched over what looks like 3 dead security men. I go to leap after him, but my whole left side is still going numb with the shock from the cane, and I slump to one side. The adept gives a shriek, drops the parchment, and turns to run, but Lori's up and after him, 5 strides from her long, slim legs propelling her right into him. She leaps into the air, her right foot striking out, smashing perfectly into the base of his skull, pitching him into his face as she lands lightly on her feet. She grabs his head with both hands, as with the security guard, breaks his spine as if wringing the neck of some fowl for dinner. Luckily for us, no one else comes along, and we find an empty terminal room behind us. Piling the dead men inside, I shut the door and then ram the blade of my knife into the lock, snapping it off with a twist of my wrist. Hopefully, no one will be too bothered about getting in there, I say as we grab an arm of the officer and start dragging him along the corridor. Those are some pretty special moves you had out there, I comment as we get to the junction, and Lori peers over the corner. Special training, she replies, waving me on. What was your unit before you were sent to the penal battalion? I ask, realizing that everything we know about the twins starts from after they were discharged. It was a special infiltration force. 50 of us, she tells me, returning to pick up her end of the unconscious Typhon officer. I can't really talk about it. Were you special in that outfit? I ask, picking my words carefully, considering Lauren's earlier warning about remarks concerning their outlandish appearance. Oh, no, she says, glancing at me with a smile. We were all like that. It was part of our unique preparation and training. The feeling is returning to my left arm now, and I heft the unconscious rebel over my shoulders, and we run for it. We get to the door where the others are waiting, and I knock on it with my foot. Yes, I hear the colonel saying from inside. It's us, you stupid fraggers. Let us in. I snapped tersely through the gap, between the door and the frame, my face resting against the cold metal of the door, my shoulders beginning to ache from its oblivious burden. The door opens a crack and I barge in, throwing Stridon to the floor, a pistol in his hand. I unceremoniously dump the security officer at Gudman's feet with a vocal relief, as Laurie kicks the door shut behind us. This one do? I ask Gudmans. Because if it don't, you could fragging well get your own next time. Is he alive? The colonel asks, as a groan escapes our prisoner's lips, and he begins to move sluggishly. Oh, that is not necessary, Gudmans assures us, laboriously kneeling beside the prone traitor. His fingers doing something to the man's neck I can't quite see. When the tech priest has finished, the captive has become a corpse, his face flushed red with blood. What did you do? Asks Stridon, bending closer for a look, curiosity and excitement flashing across his face. I merely manipulated the flow of blood in his carotid artery and jugular vein to create a hemorrhaging effect to his brain, the tech priest explains, the matter-of-fact tone I can imagine him using to describe how to operate a comlink frequency dial. I give an involuntary shudder and step away. What do we do with him now? Asked the colonel, still sitting where he was when we left a few minutes ago. Gudmans looks at me as he pushes himself to his feet, joints cracking loudly in protest at this harsh treatment. We need a saw of some kind, he says, looking expectantly at me, withered head cocked to one side. Oh, bugger off, I reply miserably. Considering the trouble we had to go through to get everything Gudmans wanted in the end, it might have just been easier to single-handedly storm the access way. As we marched purposefully up the main access corridor towards the two guards stationed by the portal in the next ring, I offer a silent prayer to the Emperor that this ridiculous scheme works. In the end, we decide it would be best to break into an infirmary to get all the items on Gudman's list. The Colonel, Lauren, Stridon, and me backtracked to a tremarium a couple of kilometers back the way we came. We knew it would be impossible to find any medical facility in the Citadel that wasn't crammed with war wounded, and decided to just go for the nearest one. So it was that Stridon was dragged by us, kicking and screaming enough to be heard across the system into the infirmary, clasping his hands over his face. Plasma blindness, the colonel said as curtly as the medicos clustered around. I dropped Stridon and made my way to the next room, where there's about 50 wounded soldiers, some of them in beds, most on rough pallets strewn across the floor. The ward stinks of blood and infection, tinged with a bitter swell and smell of hygienic fluids. Back in the other rooms, Lauren covered the door into the medical center. I didn't see what happened next, but the colonel strode into the ward, a bunch of brass keys in hand. He detailed me to dispose of the bodies while I fetched the surgical tools Gudmans needed. I went back to the other room and saw Lauren and Stridon looking strangely at each other. I glanced down at the two dead medicos to see their faces contorted, as if shouting, but I can't find any other marks on them. I asked the other two what the colonel did, but they refused, saying some things were best forgotten. And that's how we get here. The colonel dressed in the security officer's uniform, boldly walking towards the two guards. They straighten up as they see us approach, exchanging a quick glance with each other. Neither of them says a word, as the colonel and Gudmans step up to a red glass panel set to the wall on the right side of the door. Gudmans is standing between the guards and Schaefer, hands held innocently behind his back so that they can't see what I can. The colonel pulls out the security officer's severed hand from the darkness of Gudmans' sleeve and deftly fits the tube projecting from its sutured wrist into the intraverum Gudmans inserted into his arm earlier. With his own pulse simulating a fake heartbeat in the dead hand, the colonel places it against the screen, and a beam of yellow light plays between the fingertips, apparently reading the pattern on the end of the fingers. The The screen changes to green, and a tone resounds from a speaker set in the ceiling. As expertly as he attached it, the colonel disconnects the hand from himself and passes it back to Gudmund's. The two security men salute as we walk through the opening gates, standing to attention with their laser carbines along the seams of their right leg, their faces staring obediently into the middle distance. It's a position I learnt well on garrison duty. Hurry up! Hisses the colonel between tight lips when we're a few meters further down the tunnel. Walking next to him, I look over with a puzzled look. He notices my stare and glances down at his right hand before fixing his look ahead of him. I serendipitously look down and a lump appears in my throat when I realize the occasional droplet of blood is running down his wrist, gathering on his fingers and sporadically dripping to the floor. I glance back over my shoulder, and luckily the two guards are still in their parade ground position. But it won't be long before one of them looks our way and sees the faint trail of blood on the metal flooring. We take the next quiet turning. The first couple had some people in them, and break into a run, sending Lauren ahead to check it out first. She comes back and guides us along a deserted route until we find an empty had complex. The floor is patterned with red and white triangular tiles. I guess the Typhons must really like triangles. The underground houses show signs of being in use, but no one seems to be around at the moment. Lauren starts checking the 20 or so glass paneled doors around the circular communal area at the center of the little complex. And the third one she tries is unlocked. I remember the days when you could just leave your door unlocked without fear, jokes Laurie. Hurrying through, we find ourselves in a dining chamber, a small kitchen area at one end. There's more tiling on the floor and walls, and in two different shades of blue. The colonel rips the intravenum from his arm and flings it to the waste grinder behind a small cooking stove. I thought these were supposed to seal up without the tube inserted, the colonel barks loudly at Gudmund's, who flinches from Schaefer's anger. There must have been some flowback from the rebel's hand, he explains, with his hands raised slightly in a placating gesture. They were not designed for this kind of procedure. Please remember. The colonel calms down slightly as we nose around the habpin. There are two small bedrooms of living space, and they have their own ablutions area, complete with a basin and bathtub. Lucky bastards, I say to Stridon as he splashes cold water over his face. My barracks are never like this. These are not barracks, Cage. I hear the colonel correct me from the front chamber. The second and third rings are for the factory areas. This is where the civilians live. Civilians, says Laurie, popping her head around one of the bedroom doors, a dark red floppy felt hat on her head. Yes, civilians, replies the colonel. This is the capital city of Typhos Prime, not just the fortress. And take that stupid thing off. Laurie disappears again, muttering something about the hat suiting her. Lauren, who's by the front door keeping watch, gives an urgent hiss. Someone's coming. Someone's coming, he hisses. When a figure appears right outside the door, we bundle into one of the bedrooms, while the colonel peers through the living space. I can hear the front door opening and closing, and the colonel ducks back inside, face screwed up in consternation. It's strange to notice how much more alive he seems to become since we got inside Court Norum. It's like this is the only thing he lives for. Perhaps it is. The door to the bedrooms opens, and a plump, middle-aged woman steps in. Quick as a flash, Cronin grabs her from behind the door, clamping a bony hand across his mouth. And the Emperor saith that the meek and silent shall be rewarded, he whispers silently to her ear. Her eyes are rolling left and right, looking at the strangers in her bedroom, terror in her mind. What the frag do we do to her? I ask the colonel, as Cronin leads her over the bed. He puts a finger on his lips. He puts a finger up to his lips and nods understanding, and he lets her go. She gives a fearful whimper, but doesn't scream. We can't take her with us. We can't take her with us, and she'll be discovered if we leave her here, says Lori, eyeing our captive with a frown. You can't just kill her, Stryden exclaims, stepping protectively between the colonel and the woman. She's already dead, Gudman says quietly in his grating voice. The colonel looks at me and gives a slight nod. With his attention fixed on the colonel, Stryden doesn't see me across the side of the bed. The woman is also staring at the colonel, probably wondering why a security officer is in her home. I lean across the bed, and before the woman knows what's happening, I grab her throat in both hands. She gives a stifled cry and lashes out blindly, her fingernails clawing at my face. She writhes and squirms as I squeeze tighter, her eyes locking on mine, alternating looks of pleading and anger. I feel someone grabbing at my shoulder, Stryden shouting something in my ear, but my whole universe is just me and the woman. Her thrashing grows sluggish, and her arms drop to the bedcloths, which have been rocked around her, with her struggling. With a final effort, I squeeze the life out of her, her dead eyes looking at me with a mixture of confusion and accusation. I feel someone dragging the lieutenant off my back, and I let go of her throat slowly. I look down at her pleasant face, purple from the choking now, and I don't feel anything, not guilt or remorse. Inside, another human part of me seems to die. That was too extreme, Owen says with a doubtful look as I pull myself off the bed. Like Gudman says, she's already dead, I tell them. They're all dead if we succeed, all 3 million of them. What? Asks Lori, walking over to the bed and closing the dead woman's eyes with her fingertips. We're not going to shut down the plasma reactors, are we, Colonel? I say, turning my face to Schaefer. No, he says, simply shaking his head. I'm not a tech priest, but the hive I'm from ran on plasma reactors, I tell them, flopping down to a plastic chair in front of what looks to be a dressing table. Once they start, you don't shut them down. It's a self-fueling process, but you can make them overload. We're going to overload one of the plasma reactors? All of them, actually, replies Gudmans. They are homophagically linked. If one of them fails, they all fail. Call me stupid, says Lori, sitting on the edge of the bed, but I still don't see where this is going. We kill the power by overloading the reactors, not shutting them down, so what? Gudman sighs heavily and lowers himself onto the bed next to Lori, weariness in every moment. Let me try to explain in terms you might understand, he says, looking at all of us in turn. A plasma reactor is, in essence, a miniature star captured inside a gravimetric and electromagnetic force walls. If you remove the machine god's blessing from those shields, the star goes into a chain reaction, resulting ultimately in detonation. 3 plasma reactors fueling each other's chain reactions will create an explosion, roughly 60 kilometers in every direction. Nothing but ash will be left, adds the colonel. And at the heart, not even the ash will survive. Sounds like an extreme way to win a war, offers Stryden, who's not calmed down at all. It has to be done this way. I will not tell you any more, he says insistently. We must get moving. I want to find another terminal so that Gudmans can check on what the security teams are doing. I expect at least one body has been found by now, and I want to know if they suspect any kind of enemy infiltration. We will have to proceed even more carefully. I'm going to take a brief 5-minute break, maybe less, 3 to 5 minute break. I bought this. This is $4. Let's see how bad it is. Oh, that's actually pretty good. It's not bad. It's actually really good, man. All right, let's get to it. Half an hour later, and we're walking along what appears to be a main thoroughfare across the factory area. Massive shuttered gateways fill one wall, indicating closed sites to provide workers for the munition works, I suspect. The ceiling and walls are brick lined rather than metal, but the now familiar Typhon fondness for different colors and geometric patterns can be seen in a huge mosaic that covers the floor of the 20-meter wide passageway. Apart from Gudmans, who wears his robe as normal, tech priests are a frequent sight around here by the look of it. We're dressed in civilian garb, looted from the Habpins where I strangled the woman. Lori has a rather fetching light blue dress, and the hat she was so fond of, while her brother, Strident and myself are dressed in dun-colored workers' coveralls. The colonel, rot his soul, managed to find what might have been a wedding suit or something. Tight black breeches with a long-tailed dark blue coat. It's not as out of place as you might think. It seems to be the sort of outfit the higher-ranking civilians wear around here. Cronin found a rough spun jerkin and some leggings that fitted his short, wiry frame from the tools we found in that home. I guess they used to belong to a spanner boy. We used to have them back on Olympus. Well, still do, I guess. Their job is to crawl into the bowels of the machinery and tighten up gears and chains. It's a dangerous job because you can't afford to stop the machines from running. And you can easily lose a limb or your head to some whirling arm or pumping piston. One of the cruelest things I saw was to send in a couple of other spanner boys to remove a body that was clogging up a transmission mechanism. Of course, during a full trade war, their job is the opposite. They sneak into the enemy factories for a bit of sabotage. We're almost unarmed. We ditched our captured guns in a waste grinder in the Hab complex. I've got a knife secreted in my coveralls, though. I'm not totally defenseless. There's a lot of people around here at the moment. I think there must be a shift change. A klaxon sounded a few minutes ago. And the streets, well, I call them streets, but they're just wide corridors, really, are packed with a throng. I feel more at home here, underground. When I've been in other towns, I've always had the strange sensation that someone's stolen the roof. Being brought up on a hive makes you think like that. We've split up a bit as to attract not much attention, after Gudmans told us to keep heading anti-clockwise around the second ring. Gudmans found another terminal to plug into and says that the security forces have been wildly sending reports around. Some smart officer has realized that there's a connection between the flurry of murders on the outer ring and the bloodstains found near the gate to the next circle. There's also the question of the dead troopers at the gatehouse, and they've tightened up security in the third ring, the one we've got to get to next. Gudmans assures us that there's a lot more through traffic between the second and third circles, as they are both civilian areas. But if the guards are getting itchy, there could be all kinds of problems. Strolling along with Stridon, who's been in a silent, tetchy mood since I had to kill the woman, I catch snippets of conversations with the people around. Most of them are chattering about the usual stuff. how the boss is having an affair with some wench from the factory floor, what the plans are for the next wedding, how the food in the factory kitchens has been getting a lot worse lately, day-to-day life that denies the raging conflict only a short distance away. But they do talk about the war a little bit, and that's what started confusing me. They keep talking about the damned rebels and traitor army camped outside their walls. These people seem to think that we're the rebels, not them. They accuse the rebels, I mean the Imperium actually, of starting the war, of attacking without provocation. I'd ask the colonel about it if I thought there was any point, but I don't reckon he'd give me a straight answer. As the people around disappear a bit more, I catch a glance of Cronin ahead of us. Time for a sip, time for a sip, time for a sip of cheap shitty wine, cheap shitty wine, cheap shitty 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 wine. The Gayo family. Ah. Time for a sip of cheap shitty wine. $5.40 blaze it. That's what I say at work, and the Zoomers love it. When I say $5.40 blaze it. Oh no. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Fuck it. The people About half an hour later, we're walking along what appears to be a main thoroughfare across the factory area. Massive shuttered gateways fill one wall, indicating closed sides to provide workers for the munitions works, I suspect. The ceiling and walls here are brick lined rather than metal, but the now familiar Typhon fondness for different colors and geometric patterns. Oh, yeah. As the people around us disperse a bit more, I catch a glimpse of Cronin ahead of us, looking like he's having an argument with a couple of the locals. He must have got separated from Lauren, who was supposed to be looking for the head case. After the head case, cursing myself, I hurry forward. Just asking for an apology, I am. One of the factory workers is saying angrily, hands on his hips. His face is pitted with burn scars, and his head is beginning to go bald. Cronin's not a tall man, but he's still a couple of centimeters taller than this tiny fellow. And all are blessed in the sight of the Emperor, says Cronin, getting worked up, frustrated that he can't make himself understood. Stop saying that stuff, the other worker snarls. You a preacher or something, you think? Why don't we all settle down? Calls Stridon as we jog up to them. Who the hell, off-worlder, are you? Demands the first, turning to confront us. His friend steps up to him next, offering support with his threatening posture. He's more my height, and his thick biceps and solid forearms show he's no stranger to heavy manual labor. He looks like he can handle himself, but then again, so can I. Bad news for you if you don't frag off this instant, I hiss at them, squaring up. You're all the same, coming down here to tell us how to run them factories, the second one says, pointing an accusing finger at me. Treats us like we just fell out of the sky, do you? About time somebody's put in their place, ask me. I just laugh. I can't stop myself. It's so ridiculous. The irony is outstanding. I fought in a dozen wars now, and I'm about to get in a fight with a couple of factory workers because I talk with an off-world accent. There's a manic edge to my laugh that makes them stare closely at me, suddenly wary. "All mad you are," spits the first one, throwing his arms up in disgust. "All of you off-worlders." "Mad enough," I say, putting every ounce of menace I can into those words. The tall one realizes the threat isn't empty and grabs his friend by the shoulders, pulling him away. The short one keeps looking back at us, hurling abuse back at us, causing some of the passerbys to look. "You!" I snarl at Cronin, grabbing the front of his coveralls and dragging him up to his shoes. "You keep next to me and don't say nothing." Pushing the two other last chancers ahead of me, I cast one final look around. There's a security team, 3 men, walking further along the corridor, and I see a young woman hurrying towards them. I start to walk faster, trying to hurry, but be inconspicuous at the same time, which is some feat, I'll tell you. I hear a shout to stop from behind. "Frag!" I curse, breaking into a run and grabbing the other two as I run between them. "Get your legs moving, we're in trouble." Something that I like that this author does, he puts Gab Thorpe puts a lot of breaks. There's a lot of breaks in like what's happening, and it just makes the pace better. It just makes the pace better when there's a lot of breaks. It's basically like a paragraph, 4 paragraphs. This is too good right here. I'm almost afraid. I'm almost afraid of how drunk it's gonna get me. The past 2 hours have been the worst in my life. I've seen neither hide nor hair of the colonel, Lauren, Laurie, or Gudmans. And the three of us have just been ducking and diving like mad as security teams poured into the factory area. At one point, we rounded a corner and walked slap bang straight into 5 of them. Luckily, Cronin and me were quicker on the uptake and took them down with only a short fight. These ones were well armed, which was a first, carrying heavy automatic pistols, which the three of us relieved from their unconscious bodies. Which all leads up to where I am now, crouching with a pistol in each hand at the top of the ladder, while Strident and Cronin are behind me, trying to prise the grill off a ventilation duct. It was a stroke of pure luck that we found the turning that led here, a district of abandoned factories. Another fortunate twist brought to us. We're not totally alone, though. I can hear security men shouting to each other in the distance. I've got no idea what's going on outside, but I can see nobody's entered the building yet. There's a clang as they drop the grill to the floor, and I wince, wondering if anyone else heard it. Turning, I see Strident grinning back at me. "You two in first. Go left and keep heading that way. Don't turn off at all until we can work out some kind of a plan," I tell them, peering down the ladder again to check no one's nearby. The Rockcrete floor plant is as deserted as it was a moment before. Satisfied that it's safe, I push myself up the grill and follow the other two. "Frag it!" I shout, slamming my fist against the metal lining of the conduit. "For Emperor's sake, give me a break." I slump to the floor, teeth gritted with frustration. For half an hour, we've crawled along the duct. And when it widened out, I thought we were getting somewhere. I was wrong. About 20 meters ahead of us, a massive fan is spinning, blocking any route forward. Crawling around in the darkness, never sure if you're going to pitch down in some hole in the blackness. My nerves have started to jangle. And this is all I need to backtrack a couple of 100 meters or so to get to the last turning. Pulling myself together, I stand up and walk closer to the extraction fan. It isn't going that fast. Too fast to jump through, and beyond its blades, I can see an area that looks like the communal foyer of a hab area. Like most of Court Norum, the area is tiled with different colors and shapes. all stark contrast to the grimy, dull metal of the hive factories where I'm from. I can see two children sitting in the middle of the open play area, with some kind of game in their hands. All in all, it doesn't look like an unpleasant place to be brought up, even with the war raging outside the walls. Studying the fan itself, it seems to be made of some kind of ceramic, about twice as wide as my outstretched arms. There's a thin metal mesh on the far side, clogging up in places with bits of dirt and stuff, so I guess it's there to stop the fan from being jammed. Back up a bit, I tell the others as we pace back from the fan, drawing the pistols from where they're rammed in the belt of my coveralls. What are you doing? Asks Stryden, looking at the pistols. Taking the initiative, I tell him, aiming both pistols down the duct. The muzzle flare is blinding as it reflects off the metal of the air shaft, and the conduit rings with the roar of the firing. As I hope, the fan shatters into shards, which fly off in all directions. With my ears recovering, I hear shouts from the end of the duct. I push myself forwards past the wreckage of the fan drive system. There's about 24 people clustered in the communal area now, all looking up at me, standing at the end of the duct, pistol in each hand. I kick out the grill, forcing some of them to jump back as it clatters the ground. Anyone moves, I kill 'em, I tell them, keeping my voice calm and steady. I mean it as well. I look down at their dumbfounded faces. All I can see in my mind's eye are little piles of ash. They're all dead if we succeed. They're walking corpses. Cronin and Stryden crowd in behind me, and I lower myself a couple of meters down the wall, whipping around the pistols to make sure nobody gets too close. The two children are clinging to their mother, a slim young woman dressed in red coveralls, her eyes wide with fear. But they're not two children, really, just two tiny, pathetic piles of ash. I hear the other two dropping behind me, and Cronin steps up next to me, a pistol in his hand. As we walk forward, the crowd parts around us, everybody's attention fixed with grim fascination on the strange men who have dropped into their lives so violently and unexpectedly. We've almost reached the corridor leading off from the Hadpins when some idiot hero makes a lunge for Cronin's gun. The pistols in my hand spit death, flinging his ragged corpse into the crowd, who immediately breaks into hysterical screaming. Fleeing towards the safety of their home, breaking into a run of our own, we hurry off. I don't even spare a second thought for the dead man in the plaza. So, yeah, the mission, I think I can finish this first part soon. Basically, the mission is going just according to plan, I guess. Everything's just pretty much going according to plan. They got spotted I think twice now? Yeah, twice now they've been spotted. And they've left a trail of like corpses and unconscious people behind. They're on the run. Ditching the guns into a waste shaft, they'd be really no use and far too conspicuous. We make our way towards the next gate. Well, as far as I can tell, my sense of direction is somewhat turned on its head by the time spent in the air ducts. We come across some kind of marketplace, a huge open space full of stalls, many of which seem to be closed down. I guess there isn't too much to sell, really, as Corinorum is under siege. An immense bronze statue of Machirius, I think, dominates the center of the plaza. Stood upon a marble pedestal is clear, which was a clear 3 meters taller than me. The place is quite busy, though, and gives us plenty of cover to avoid the few guards prowling around, ducking into the crowds if they get too close. Most of the people around are women and young children. I assume the older children men are working hard in the factories and struggling to maintain this huge citadel as the noose of the Imperial forces outside tightens even more. I wonder what the hell has happened to the rest of the last Chancers, and I'd happily let them go off and finish the mission while we hole up somewhere. That isn't an option, though, unless I fancy being fried by an explosion. We managed to get back into the main corridor eventually, running in a wide circle around the second ring. From there, it's easy to get my bearings as we hurry as much as possible. I got no idea what we'll do once we get to the access way or how we're going to link up with the Colonel, but I decide that we need to worry about one thing at a time for the moment. An increase in the frequency of the guards warns me when we start getting close to the linking tunnel, and we walk straight past it, getting a glance at how well manned it is. I can't stop and count without arousing too much suspicion, but I reckon on a dozen men at least. We walk around another 100 meters down the corridor when we come across what looks like a guardhouse, the symbol of the security forces blazoned on the solid double doors. No one is around, not even a security team, and I saunter closer for a better look, the other two trailing dumbly behind me, quite content just to follow my lead. Realizing that there's nothing to be done here, I turn to walk away. At that moment, I hear the doors grinding open behind me, and a shiver runs down my back as someone starts walking toward me. I hear the colonel's voice behind me. Get in here, you idiot! 20 dead security guards lie inside the station, which doesn't appear to be anything more than a terminal room, with a few cells to one side. Once more, there's a mosaic, this time a representation of some battle from the past, rather than abstract shapes. I can't tell what it is. The bodies of the dead security men obscure too much of it. Their bloated faces match those of the guardsmen in the gate tower, reminding me we're not the only ones fighting against the rebels from within. You took your time, Lauren says as we stroll in. What happened here? Stryden asks, looking at all the corpses. Dead when we arrived, answers Lauren with a shrug. I guess our invisible helper from the gatehouse is still watching over us. Have you been deliberately trying to get caught, Cage? Demands Schaefer, closing the doors behind us. He gestures towards Gudmans, who's sitting at the largest terminal, plugged in again. We have access to the whole security network from here and have been monitoring the comm channels. We have been tracking reports of your whereabouts for the past 4 hours. Lucky for you, Gudman's managed to conjure up some false reports and fake a fire emergency to lead them off the trail. So, how do we get past the next gate? Asks Stryden. They'll be extra cautious now. We will walk through, as we did last time, the colonel tells us, gesturing to the uniformed men lying around us. Security teams have been going through each way for the past 2 hours. One more will not arouse any undue attention. Everyone's attention is drawn to Gudman's. When he gives a gasp, and I look at him as the neural plug whips back to his head, and he slumps back further into the chair. What is it? He asked the colonel, going over to lean on the back of the chair and stare at the dozen screens on the terminal face. I cannot use the terminal network anymore, he tells us slowly, recovering from some kind of shock. They realized what I was doing, and the other tech priests started scanning the networks for me. I managed to eject just before they found me, but only because I have had more practice at this type of thing over the past 2 days. They will find me straight away if I go again. What was the thing that you found out last? Asked Schaefer, turning his head from the screens to look at the tech priest. There has been nothing to suggest that they know we are heading for the plasma reactors, he assures us. They suspect we might be trying to get to one of the current turret clusters in the central keep. They have no idea we are here for something more far unpleasant than just disabling a few cannons. Good. We will press on, the colonel says, standing up and passing an eye over the dead security men on the floor. We should be able to get to the last access tunnel before night. The third ring is not very big at all. And then what? Lauren asks, crouching down the coveralls from a likely crouching down to strip the coveralls from a likely sized guard. We finish our mission, the colonel replies grimly. Being at the right place at the right time really matters. I mean, it's really easy to think that, you know, if something's good, someone's already done it, but that's the thing is a lot of people I don't know. Most people have no interest in anything. So, yeah, I'm drunk. Fuck. I've been thinking about our mysterious guardian, says Lori, as we walk down a flight of steps that take us away from the main corridor in the third cycle. Why didn't they blow up the reactors? It is a very complex process to curse a containment field of the type we are talking about, explains Gudmans as he hobbles down the Rocktree steps in front of us. The bulk of a plasma reactor is dedicated to creating wards and holograms to make sure the machine god's blessing remains. Many failsafes will stop you. You cannot just touch a rune and say a few canticles to turn them off. It takes one of my order to do it. And I can see why you couldn't be sent in alone, adds Lauren from above, referring to the tech priest's increasing frailty. It's as if he's aging a year every hour. He's slowed down that much since we met him 3 days ago. He said he would last a month, but looking at his current condition, I can't imagine him seeing the end of the next day. The colonel's gone tight-lipped on us again, obviously tensing up as we get closer to our goal. He was almost human for a while, but has reverted to man-machine mode now. The third ring is similar to the second, terraces of factories interspersed with mazes of habpins. There's the strange mix of metal paneling, brickwork, and tiling that can be found in the outer rings. Trying to imagine the pattern of different styles in my head. With what little I know of Court Norm's layout, it seems to me that originally this area was in fact several different citadels, which over time have slowly been joined together, with the central access tunnels constructed to link them all together at some point later. As nightfall approaches outside, things start to get a lot quieter. We see fewer people, many of them security guards, who we swap salutes with before hurrying on. As we approach the final accessway, the sprawling rooms become more military-looking, with lots of terminal chambers, and what appears to be barracks. I can feel everyone getting more nervous as we march along the twisting corridors, and I try to distract the other last chancers to stop them getting too jumpy. I wonder how Lickskrig is doing. I ask in general. Glad he isn't here, I bet, Lori ventures, casting an edgy glance down a side tunnel. He's dead, the colonel informs me quietly from where he's walking ahead of us. How can you possibly know that? Asks Lauren. Because the Penal Legion he was sent to was the one ordered to make the divisionary attack when we came in through the sally port. He explains, not looking at us. And turning from the flames, St. Baxter leapt from the cliffs, says Cronin, half to himself. He might have survived, Lauren says, grasping at a shred of hope for our departed comrade. No, the colonel tells us. I personally gave Commissar Handel strict instructions that they were to fight to the last man. He will have carried out his orders to the letter. We walk on in silence for another couple of minutes, pondering this turn of events. What would you have done if we had all refused this mission? Asks Lauren, as the colonel takes us down a left turn, leading us across a gantry that passes over what looks to be a metalworks. The furnace is dead at the moment. You'd be fragged if at least half of us had turned you down. I admit I did not expect Lynx Creek to refuse, says the colonel, still facing forward. I thought that none of you would turn down the opportunity I presented you with. Lynx Creek had less character than I credited him with. Why so certain we'd come along? Lauren persists, hurrying forward to fall into step beside Schaefer. Because that is why you are still here, he replies. You have a lust for life that defies the odds. I knew that if I offered you the chance for freedom, you would take it. But Lynx Creek didn't accept, crows Lauren victoriously. We fall silent for a moment as we reach the end of the gantry to turn into another metal-walled corridor. A couple of scribes coming towards us, giving us suspicious looks as we pass them by. That must have rattled you, Lauren says when the Typhons have disappeared from view. You must have been a bit shaken up when Lynx Creek said no. The colonel stops abruptly, turning his heel to face us. I did not choose to have Lynx Creek and the Last Chancers. He was forced upon me, he snarls at us. The rest of you, I personally recruited, studied your files, watched you in battle, and weighed your personalities. I did not wage war on a dozen worlds over 3 years for no reason. I had to be sure of you. With that, he turns and walks away. We exchange shunned glances for a couple of seconds before hurrying after Schaefer. You mean you've known this is what we've been doing all along? I ask, amazed at the concept. Yes, is all he replies. You mustered 4,000 men when you knew that only a handful would be able to get into this place. I press on relentlessly. Yes, is all he says again, and I can feel anger radiating from his body. Why? I demand. Why the hell do all that? Because we needed the best, Cage, he says through gritted teeth. Like it or not, the Last Chancers produced the best fighters and survivors in this part of the galaxy. You have all shown the combat skills and qualities of personality needed for this mission. I have tested you to destruction, but I have not been able to destroy you. Tested? I almost scream at him, curbing my anger at the last moment in case it attracts unwanted attention. It's easy to forget we're in the middle of an enemy stronghold. The off-white lighting of the glow strips set in the ceiling flickers as we pass into another area, and the corridor seems to dim. This corridor seems dimmer than the others. Problems with energy distribution. Problems with energy distribution, I reckon. If we're successful, the Typhon's power supply problems are going to be a lot worse. It is true, the colonel admits, pinching the bridge of his nose like he's got a headache or something. Many of the events over the past 3 years have been chosen or engineered to focus on different parts of your military ability and personality traits. They have tested your initiative and resourcefulness. They have examined your determination, sense of duty, discipline, and responses to fear. I admit it is not a precise process, but I think you will agree I have managed to turn all the situations to my advantage. And along the way, we have helped win a few wars. Is that so bad? Not a precise process? I spit angrily. I guess the heart of the jungle was a little bit unexpected, wasn't it? And what about the Eldar attack on the transport? Inconvenient, was it? And the shuttle crash in Hypernull? He doesn't reply, simply keeps marching resolutely along the corridors. Then my brain catches up with the rest of his earlier words. You said engineered, I say, surprised that I can get even angrier at what this man has done to us. Yes, he admits, glancing back over his shoulder at me. Mostly, I chose situations that would provoke the required conditions. But some had to be set up deliberately. The shuttle crash was one of those situations. You cannot just hope for that sort of thing to happen, can you? That's the final twist. Something inside me snaps. I jump forward and lay a hand on Schaefer's shoulder and spin him around. Before I can do anything else, he slaps me backhanded across the face, almost knocking me from my feet. I'm stunned by the act as much as by the pain. I'd never before seen him hit a last chancer who didn't attack him first. Maintain discipline, Lieutenant Cage, he says coldly, staring at me with those glinters of eyes he has for eyes. I will no longer tolerate this insubordination. I'm half shocked and half not by this news. Our suspicion had been growing over the past few months in particular, but the extent to which the Colonel has manipulated events is almost unbelievable. I begin to wonder how much he's done, how often he's done this before, how many times he has killed thousands of soldiers just to see who were the best, the greatest survivors. How many times more would he do it? It seems such a merciless, uncaring thing to do, but part of me can see his reasoning. It's a merciless, uncaring galaxy we live in. And if other missions were just as important as this one, to save whole worlds, I could just about forgive him. Just about. It still doesn't explain why he was still so secretive about the mission goals. Did he really think we'd back down when we realized what was at stake? Does he think so little of us that he doesn't believe we have at least that much decency and courage we'd be willing to fight for the sake of a world of people, for the hundreds of thousands of guardsmen and Navy personnel who'd lose their lives to take the place by force? We walk on in resentful silence. This wine is fucking hitting, man. I was kind of just like, man, I want some pot, man. I want some fucking energy drink, man. But man, this is great. It's already the afternoon. Fuck. Oh. The thing is like, I don't know, if you want to do something, go do it. I'm going to tell you this right now, all right? Because you're like comparing people, right? You're like, oh, well, you know, they can do it. They're doing it. Whoever's doing that thing that you want to do might not even want to be doing it. All right. And that's some real shit. So if you want to do it, but like, that's the thing though, is you actually have to want to do it. You have to want to go do it. You actually have to want to do it because it's so easy. It's so easy in this climate to like want something. All right. Because it's, you understand what other people want. And so you get like this barometer for, you know, what want is. And you see that same want echoed and reflected a bunch of other people's wants too, right? But look, I'm here to tell you their wants and that want is not the same want, okay? So if you want to do it, fucking do it, all right? Look, I'm telling you right now, whoever's doing it right now probably doesn't want to do it, okay? But the thing is, and I've repeated this is the second time I'll repeat it. I'll do it 3 times. You actually have to want to do it, okay? And that's the thing. All right, for example, all right, let's talk about money because that's what everyone wants to know about right now is the fucking money. Everyone's so fucking 4 of fucking pentacles, fucking greedy as fuck. This guy fucking attacked me. And like I can't see it, but like I have like a fucked up scar on the side of my head. This guy fucking attacked me and beat me he just destroyed me. And like it freaked me out. It was just scary. Like I wasn't like afraid I was gonna die. I was just afraid that I would be like crazy or something after someone just ambushed me. And everyone told me to sue him. Everyone told me to just sue the person, but it's just like, look, I don't want to sue him. Everyone wanted me to sue. I don't want to sue him though. And the thing is, right, is I could have sued him, but either I would have won and I would have lost, or I would have lost and I would have lost because I didn't want to fight him. All right. If you don't have the will to fight, don't fight. If you don't have the will to do it, don't do it. So those things that you're doing that you don't want to do, don't do them. And inversely, the things you want to do, you have to want to do. But look, let's say even I got $1 million and I was set for life. Like that wouldn't have happened. The guy has no money. The guy that attacked me has no money. That's part of the reason he attacked me is he had nothing to lose. I'd be set for life. I mean, as long as I didn't smoke it all away. But the thing is it wouldn't be my life. It would be like a half life. Like I would get half of their life and half of my life, and somehow it would be 2 halves of 2 lives that are not like compounding on each other. Okay, so that's the thing is if you want something to happen, all you have to want is to want, like all you need is to actually want it. It's there. We find what looks to be a deserted archive room. We hide out and formulate the next part of our plan. Rows and rows of parchments, data slabs, and crystal discs surround us on endless shelves. Hidden among the teetering mass of information, we cluster around a battered wooden table, looking intently at a copy of Court Norm's innermost layout. Brought forth like magic from Gudmund's voluminous sleeves. Our benefactor have anything lined up for this one? Asks Lauren, leaning across the schematic at the far end of the table. We will have to work this. We will have to work. Wow. Voice cycling. We will have to work this one out ourselves, the colonel replies, shaking his head. All eyes turn to Gudmund's. This will not be easy, he says heavily, taking a deep sigh. To open the gate requires a retinal scan. A what? Asks Lori, looking across from where she's perched on the side of the table, bent over the map. Remember the first gate. The scanner read the skin indentations of the security officer's fingertips, he asks, and we all nod in agreement. Who can forget that macabre episode? Well, this portal has a device that can map the blood vessels within your eyeball. An eye? Exclaimed Stryden, looking disconsolate. He had been starting to cheer up again, getting over the grisly episode with the woman, I guess. That's going to be even trickier than getting a hand. Forget about eyeballs, says the colonel quietly, and we turn to look at him. Sat a little away from the table in a padded armchair, right elbow resting on the arm, fingers cradling his chin. We will do this the easy way. And look, it might just seem comfortable to do the things that everyone else does because of the way that they do it. But I'm going to tell you this, right? Is if you don't do what you want, if you don't have that lust for life, you don't have survivalism, right? And like, for example, I mean, I can't really fish or hunt or anything like that. And that would be like survival skills, but survivalism is just having a lust for life. And the reason why it's important to have a lust for life is maybe someone's going to do to you what they did to the last chancers. And maybe there will be 4,000 of you that gets whittled away and killed over. And, you know, it doesn't seem that likely. It seems like science fiction. But the thing is if you do not make a choice for you, the choice will be made for you, but it will not be made by you. And that's, if you're not a survivor, that's the big difference, all right? The easiest way to be a survivor is to just cut everyone off. Just cut everyone off around you. All right. I definitely think that it's the loners. If you could, I mean, you could get a group of loners together, but it's going to be the loners that survive. There's that question, right? Like, if everyone jumped off a cliff, would you jump off too? And I mean, I don't think most people are answering truthfully. I think most people would at if if most people saw 899 people jump off a cliff, they would be Mr. 900 one way or another. I guess what I'm getting at is decisions are made in this century. Decisions are made for groups of people, not just one person. So if you are in a group of people, be prepared to have the decision made for you. Now, I wouldn't say that the Colonel's way was going to be easy, but it's certainly a lot more straightforward. There's two guardsmen stood outside the armory as we approach, las guns held at the ready. They ease up slightly as they see the Colonel and his senior security officer's uniform, but are obviously on their toes. The Colonel walks up to the Opticon eye set next to the portal. Of the weapons locker. State your business, a disembodied voice says from the speaker grill just above the Opticon. Permission to enter? Asks the Colonel in a near perfect imitation of the burr of a Typhon accent. We've had orders to let no one in, says the guardsman from inside. I've got written confirmation, replies the Colonel, waving a bunch of important-looking films that we scrounged from the data library. We wait for about half a minute, exchanging nonchalant shrugs with the two guardsmen as we wait for the other man's decision. Them orders! Let's see them, he says finally, and there's a loud clank as the lock bar drops away from the door, and it swings open on powered hinges. The Colonel strides purposefully in, and the door winds shut behind him. Striding's almost hopping from foot to foot with nerves, and I give him a stern glance, hoping he'll calm down before the guardsman gets suspicious. I feel a trickle of sweat running down my right side, and have to fight at my own unease, hoping it doesn't show. Taking his time, isn't he? Comments one of the guardsmen, glancing back over his shoulder at the heavily constructed door. I just murmur and nod in agreement, not trusting my linguistic ability to impersonate a Typhon. It was probably a smart move to leave Laurie and Gudmans at the archive chamber. These guardsmen seem to be keyed up at the moment, and they're bound to have been told to be on the lookout for any pale-skinned strangers with a tech priest. I suspect the colonel's plan is the best one now. The awkward silence is broken by the portal hissing open again. The colonel stands there with a compact stub in his right hand, a bulky silencer screwed on the end of the barrel. The talkative guardsman looks back, and his eyes widen in surprise, a moment before the first bullet smashes his head into pulp, spraying blood and brains across the floor just to my right. The other guardsman turns quickly, but his lasgun is only half raised, when the next shot punches into his chest, hurling back against the wall. "Grab them and drag them inside," orders the colonel, taking a step out of the armory. I have signaled the others in the archive room from inside. They will be here shortly. And find something to clean up that mess. Time to get serious, Lori says. We walk together with the high stack crates of power cells and ammunition. Let's hope nobody else drops in for fresh supplies, comments Lauren from behind me. We want something with a bit more firepower than lasguns, the colonel tells us from up ahead as he scans the rows of boxes and racks of guns. We need one-hit kills if we are going to challenge their numbers. We search around for a few minutes before Gudman's uncovers a shelf of 15 bolters, freshly cleaned. They gleam in the bright white light of the armory, and my eye is beautiful as they are deadly. Ammunition is in those bins overhead, Gudman's says, pointing to a row of black containers hung over the bolters. Lori grabs one and pulls it down, letting it drop to the floor. Inside are dozens of bolter magazines, loaded and ready to go. She and Lauren start transferring the ammo to the heavy work trolley, pushed by Stridon. I want something with a better rate of fire, I muttered myself, looking around for a more suitable weapon. And the Emperor's rewards are bountiful for those who labor in his name, says Cronin with a smile, using a crowbar to lift the lid off a wooden crate, revealing rows of frag grenades within. He starts tossing them to Stridon, who places them on the trolley next to the bolters. Is this what you would like? Gudman says, holding a long rifle. It's finished in black enamel, oozing menace and lethality. Oh, that looks mean, I say appreciatively, walking closer. What is it? Fractix pattern assault laser, he says with a smile, running a gnarled hand lovingly over his length. It's the first time he's looked happy since I met him. 5 shots per second, twin power pack capacity. Continue. Multiple target designation, rangefinder. I used to be an overseer on one of the manufacturing lines, he adds, glancing back at me. Reliability? I ask, knowing that there's always a catch. Otherwise, everybody would have one. Oh, it is very reliable, he assures me. The only drawback is that the focus prism needs to be changed every 1,000 shots, and that requires a tech adept. Not practical for an extended battle, but perfect for our task. I take the gun from him and heft it to my shoulder, closing my left eye to look through the sight along its length. I can't see anything at all, and give a confused glance toward the tech priest. You must disengage the safety link before the optical array is powered up, he tells me, pointing towards a fingernail-sized stud just above the trigger guard. I give it a push, and the assault laser gives a little hum as the power pack warms up. Sighting again, I look back towards the others. In a small circle of the gun sight, each is surrounded by a thin light blue glow, outlining their silhouette. It can detect heat patterns as well, Gudman tells me proudly. You might not be able to see the person, but you will be able to see their outline. I grinned to myself, swinging the laser so that it is pointing at the colonel. One squeeze of the trigger, and a storm of las bolts will tear him to little pieces. I ask myself why I shouldn't do it. Why shouldn't I pull the trigger? But I know the answer, really. For a start, I'm beginning to realize that the colonel wouldn't have done this to us if he thought there was an alternative. He has his own reasons, and to him they justify any act, including killing 3 million people. I have an idea what it might be, but I'm not sure. Second, he's the only one who has the vaguest chance of getting us out of Court Norum alive. He has the mysterious contact on the inside, and he's been studying this place longer than any of us, and probably knows more about it than even Gudmann's. I think he spent the best part of the last 3 years planning this operation, and I'm sure that includes getting out of here in one piece. He might not be planning on bringing us all along, who knows? But if I stick close to him, I've got the best chance there is. I press the safety stud again, and the small circle goes black. Flak jackets and helmets are along the next aisle, the colonel says, pointing to the left. He turns and sees me with the gun pointing towards him and calmly meets my gaze. It suits you, he says, and then turns away, completely unconcerned. He knew he wasn't in any real danger. Bastard. Right, I declare, slinging the assault laser over my shoulder by the strap. Now I need some really good knives. Remember, we need one alive, Guzmans reminds us as we push the trolley of guns and ammo, concealed under a bundle of camouflage netting, towards the accessway. It must be almost midnight outside, though the glow tubes are shining just as brightly down here as ever. Everybody's sleeping, or at least that's what we hope. According to the schematic, the nearest plasma chamber is only around 800 meters from the nearest access portal, so the plan is to hit the enemy hard and fast. We get the guards on the door, using a live one to bypass the eye scanner, and then leg it as quick as possible, storming the plasma reactor room and holding off the Typhons, while Guzmans does his thing. The tech priest thinks it will take a couple of hours to deactivate the wards in the plasma chambers, hence the gratuitous amount of ammunition in the trolley being pushed by Stridon. 6 people fighting off an entire army? I fragging hope the Emperor is backing us on this one. Once that happens, we got roughly a couple of hours to get clear. We round the corner of the accessway and don't even need the order to open fire. I fire the assault laser from the hip, spraying dozens of red energy bolts into Typhons by the gateway, pitching men off their feet, scouring burn marks along the walls. Lorne and Laurie open up with their bolters, the explosive rounds detonating in a ripple of fiery blossoms, blowing fist-sized holes in the Typhon's chest and tearing off limbs. I can see a guardsman's head blown apart by a direct hit from the colonel's bolt pistol. One of them manages to return fire, the snap of his lasgun just about heard and breaks between the roar of bolters. A las bolt zips off the wall and catches Laurie across the shoulder, spinning her to the ground. Stridon brings up his shotgun, the half-random burst shredding the remaining guardsmen, scattering a mist of blood across the passageway. And then, as suddenly as it started, the fight is over. A few seconds of concentrated bloodshed and the job's done. The colonel dashes forward, starts picking his way throughout the mangled remains of the Typhons while we reload. Lorne is bent over his twin sister, an anguished look on his face. She all right? I ask, walking over. I'm fine, Laurie replies, pushing herself to her feet, blood streaming down her left arm in a red swathe. Lorne tears a strip from a dead guardsman's tunic and strips off her flak jacket and shirt. Leaving Lorne to bandage her, I check on Stridon and Cronin. We're at the main corridor into the passageway, checking nobody is going to stumble upon us. I hear the colonel give a satisfied grunt and turn to see him dragging one of the Typhons on to the eye-scanning reticle beside the gate. He pushes the man's face into it, and a moment later, the doors begin to slide open. We are in! says the colonel, placing his bolt pistol under the guardsman's chin and blowing his brains out, scattering the bits of skull over the scanner wall. We stand there for a second, staring at the strange scene of the colonel cradling the headless corpse. Get moving! He shouts, dropping the body with a thump, and we jump to it. Cronin and Stryden grabbed the trolley and ran forward. The colonel and Gudsman's up front, me and the twins covering the back. We're all the way through the gateway, and then I hit the lever to close it, and the door grinds back into place. I ram a grenade into the power cabling leading into the locking bar. As I run off, I hear the crump of the grenade detonating, and glance back, noting with satisfaction the twisted mess of wires left by the explosion. My attention is drawn to the front by the sound of the colonel's bolt pistol, and I hurry forward, assault laser ready. Some guardsmen are up ahead, just around a bend in the main tunnel, using the side corridors for cover. Las bolts spit down the passageway towards me, zinging off the walls and floor, leaving a faint scorch mark. The colonel's crouched down inside an open door, poking out now and then to fire off a shot, the bolts tearing chunks of metal from the walls. I leap forward, rolling across the floor, as a ragged lasgun volley flares towards us, slamming toward a doorway on the left of the passage. I steady myself and come up to a crouch, aim my gun at the nearest Typhon, about 20 meters down on the same side of the corridor. In the laser's sight, his head and shoulders are brought into sharp focus as he leans around the corner for another shot, and I squeeze the trigger gently. Half a dozen red bolts flash into his upper body, a couple of them punching straight through and dissipating further down the tunnel. Another fusillade of laser fire forces me to duck back into the room. This is going to take forever, I tell myself, realizing that the longer we're pinned down here, the more troops are going to be pouring down into the area. Grenades! I bellow, pulling one from my belt. I hurl it down the passageway. 3 more clatter along the floor next to it, thrown by the others. One brave guardsman dashes from cover to grab them and toss them back, but a shot from either Laurie or Lauren punches to his leg, the impact of the bolt severing it at the knee. He screams for about a second before the grenades explode, fleeing him to the air. Even as the blasts dissipate, I'm charging forward down the corridor, assault laser at my shoulder, using the sight to pick off the Typhons through the smoke and haze. I must have missed one down a side tunnel, because as I'm pounding forward, I realize that I felt something slam into the side of my head, making my ears ring and my knees buckle. Turning, I see the Typhon, a middle-aged man, his uniform slightly too tight for him. I see his eyes narrow as he lines up his next shot, the muzzle of his lasgun pointing directly at my face. Something smashes into me, hurling me down the passageway, and the only thing that registers is the smell of Laurie on top of me. The lasbolt flashes above us as we roll across the metal floor, sliding to a halt. Laurie's back on her feet in an instant, a las pistol in her hand. The first shot is a bit low, the energy blast ripping into the guardsman's thigh, sending his next shot into the ceiling as he falls sideways. Her next is straight and true, punching into his plump face with a small fountain of blood and shattered teeth, hurling backwards. You're either a hero or an idiot, she says with a smile as she helps me to my feet. Lucky for you, I'm just as brave, or stupid. In the stillness, I hear a man groaning, quickly silenced by a round from Stryden's bolt gun. I pull off my helmet and look at it, still a bit dazed from the hit. There's a charred gorge just where my right ear should be, almost burnt through. I poke at it with my finger, and I'm shocked when my fingertips passes straight through. The lasbolt had been within the thickness of a piece of parchment from actually getting through. Thanking the Emperor for his protection, I stick the helmet back on and pick up the assault laser. The roar of the Lawrence bolter echoes along the corridor from behind. More of the Typhons must be advancing on us. The colonel comes dashing around the bend, virtually dragging Gudsman's with him. Cronin charging along beside him with the metal trolley madly wobbling left and right as its wheels skitter in all directions at once. Get him to the plasma chamber, the colonel yells, pushing Gudsman's towards me and Laurie. Grabbing the aged tech priest between us, We head up the tunnel with Gudsman's. I can hear the shouts of the others and the ring of shots on the corridor walls and ceiling. The steady lump of Striden's shotgun punctuates the near constant thudding of Lawrence Bolter and Shaver's bolt pistol, and I can see the flicker of intense muzzle flash throwing their hazy shadows against the wall. Gudsman's is panting badly, barely able to stand up as we haul him by the arms along the passageway. How much further? Asked Laurie between gritted teeth. Just another 200 meters, perhaps, gasped the tech priest. Pace fail, eyes showing the pain racking his rapidly aging body. Just then, a round object the size of my fist bounces off the ceiling and drops to the floor in front of us. Grenade! Hisses Laurie, dropping Gudsman's and leaping forward. With a powerful kick, she sends the grenade back the way it came, and there's a shout of alarm a moment later, followed swiftly by the explosion. I dump Gudsman's against the wall and ready the assault laser, even as Laurie throws herself prone and swings the bolter around from where it's hanging on her back. About a dozen of them, she tells me before opening fire, spent cases cascading from the bolter's ejection vent and piling up next to her. Door to my left, I hear Gudsman's wheezing from behind me. What? I snap, firing blithely along the passageway as I look back at him. Door to my left leads through 5 bunk rooms, he explains, between ragged gasps for breath. Get you behind them. Keep them occupied, I tell Laurie as I plunge through the door. Will do, I hear her reply. As Gudsman said, I'm in a line of lined bunk rooms, each about a dozen meters long, 3-tiered beds lining the left wall, kit lockers on my right. I can see in the next couple, but then the sharper curve of Court Norm's innermost ring puts the others out of sight. I can't believe they wouldn't cover this approach, and I drop down to a crouch. I have to keep the element of surprise as long as possible, and I dump the assault laser into one of the bunks as I sneak past, drawing one of the 6 combat knives I got strapped across my chest and thighs. It feels good to have a knife in my hand. I'm a bladesman at heart, always have been. I don't mind admitting that I prefer the personal touch when you get to stab someone. Shooting them from a distance seems like a bit of an insult. Still, if some sucker's shooting at me, I'll return the compliment as quick as I can. And I'm not going to risk my neck for the sake of a slightly greater satisfaction of sliding a blade between someone's ribs. I duck quickly when I catch a glimpse of a guardsman up ahead. There's enough space for me under the bottom bed of the bunk tiers, and I crawl under it, pushing myself forward on my stomach. I can see the guardsman's boots stepping back and forth as he keeps looking behind him to check that no one's got through the other way. I realize I'm holding my breath and pause for a moment to let it out. I don't have to be too quiet. I can hear the snap of las guns and the cracks of the bolter rounds exploding from the tunnel, masking any noise I might accidentally make. I slide towards a few meters more, taking me just past the Typhon. I walk again for a few seconds, trying to figure out the best way to take down the guardsman. Looking up, I see that the actual bed pallet isn't fixed to the frame. It's just laid on top of a couple of struts. I manage to roll on my back so that my feet are pointing towards the Typhon. With a grunt, I push up with all my strength, flinging the mattress over on top of him. There's a flash of light as his finger tightens on the lasgun trigger, sending an energy bolt searing into one of the lockers. Before he can recover, I leap on top of him, and I hear his breath rushing as he's winded. Without even looking, I slash and stab a couple dozen times under the bed pallet, feeling the knife cutting into flesh and scraping along bone. He stops struggling, and a crimson pool begins to spread around me, soaking into the tattered gray bedcloths. Rolling back to my feet, I can see another guardsman, kneeling in a doorway in the next room, his attention fixed outside as he fires his lasgun down the corridor. He doesn't notice me until the last moment, a startled cry spilling from his lips, a moment before the knife point drives up the soft part under his chin. I tug at the knife to get it free, but it stuck to the top of his jaw, and I let it go and pull another from the bandolier. It's then that I look up and see another Typhon just across the corridor, 10 meters from me. He notices me too, and he brings his lasgun up to fire. I force myself back, rolling the dead guardsman on top of me. I lie there for a second or two as las bolts thud into the corpse, feeling it rocking from the impacts. Teeth gritted and eyes screwed up from the closeness of the shots. I fumble with my free hand for the dead man's las rifle. More energy bolts sear into the body, and I feel one pluck the material of my trousers, scoring the hairs and skin of my left calf. My hand closes around the trigger guard of the discarded lasgun, and I swing it around in the corridor, finger pumping on the trigger, blasting randomly for a good 5 seconds. I wait for a moment for more return fire, but none comes, and I risk a peek over the now ragged body. The doorway where the guardsman was is empty, except for a foot poking around the frame from the inside, a smear of blood on the gleaming tiles. Letting out my breath slowly, I lie there, waiting for my heart to stop its frenzied battering against my ribs. Someone stands over me, and they grab my shoulders, hauling me to my feet. It's Schaefer. Gutsman's behind him, leaning gratefully across the bunks, hand mopping sweat from his face, handing me the assault rifle from its owner. "We do not have time for you to lie around, Cage," says the colonel, leaning out of the doorway with bolt pistol ready, checking the way ahead. "We take the next turning to the left, and at the end are doors to the plasma chamber." Lauren and Lori come along the corridor cautiously, relaxing as soon as they see my ugly face. "Wondered if you made it or not," says Lori, her eyes checking me for signs of injury. I'm covered in blood and little scraps of charred flesh, but none of it's mine in any appreciable amount. "Cronin! Striding!" says the colonel as the two of them jog up through the bunk rooms, pushing the trolley. Schaefer grabs the trolley from Stryden, pushing it out across the door. "You two cover the main passageway until we gain access to the plasma chamber." As a group, we hurry to the turning that leads to the reactor. Guns ready, but not needed. Cronin and the Navy lieutenant take position either side of the side tunnel, checking both approaches, while the rest of us dash for the huge armored door at the far end. "Any smart ideas how we get in?" Lauren asks when we stood in front of it. You can tell just by looking at it that the blast door is solidly built. "Seems I've spent my whole life trying to get through fragging doors lately," bitches Lori, looking over the welded metal plates with a scowl. "We have melta bombs," Gudsmans points out, pulling a cylindrical canister from the now much smaller heap of ammo belts and energy packs on the trolley. Twisting off the top, he high-ends the tube, and 10 discs, each about the size of your palm, scatter to the floor. "How many do we need?" Schaefer asked the tech priest, picking one up and turning it over on his hand. It's 4 centimeters thick, split into 2 halves along its edge. On top is a bright orange button set into a small well. "Do I look like a demolitions expert, Colonel Schaefer?" Gudsman's rasped back, slumping to sit against the wall. "Almost all of my memory pads were removed. Remember," he adds with a sour look at the colonel. "Frag it. Use the whole lot." "Better save some just in case," Lauren suggests, as I grab the fourth and last canister. I toss it back and look expectantly at the door. "You have to activate the charges," Guzmans tells us with a heavy sigh, forcing himself to his feet, using the wall support. "Press the red activator. It takes a 5-second delay. Then clear away quickly because although most of the meltablast is directed towards the door, there is a slight backwash. Cage and I will set the charges," the colonel says, thrusting the trolley away. Just then, there's the distinctive zing of a lasbolt against metal, and Cronin gives a startled cry and pitches back from the end of the corridor, smoke rising from the scorch mark on his flak jacket, just above his heart. Hurry! Hisses Stridon, swiveling on his haunches and firing a shotgun down the corridor. The colonel and I glance at each other and then start stabbing at the fuse buttons. We've done just about half of them when the colonel grabs my collar and hauls me backwards, sending us both diving to the floor. There's a wash of hot air over my head and a deafening clang as the armored door clashes to the ground. Looking back, I see the corridor is now a ragged hole, a thin cloud of smoke hanging in the air, the walls spattered with droplets of cooling steel. Go! Barks the colonel, jumping to his feet and pulling his bolt pistol free. He leaps back a moment later, as a hail of las bolts ping off the walls around us. I can hear Stridon shouting something about. Well, I can't make out the words over the boom of the shotgun. Lauren comes running up to us, dragging the unconscious colonel with him. How many behind us? Asked the colonel, firing blind into the plasma chamber with his bolt pistol. Most of them, I think, he tells us with a worried look. I check over my shoulder and see Lori's taking up position where Cronin was, her pale face given a yellow tinge by the flare of her bolter, as she fires along the main corridor. I edge out what's left of the bulkhead around the ruined doorway, and I could just about make out the dozen or so Typhons stationed inside the reactor chamber, taking cover behind the terminals and coils of pipes that snake in every direction. The chamber's big, vaguely circular, or hexagonal maybe. It's hard to see because the walls are cluttered with machinery. A huge data screen is set onto the one side of the wall, scrolling with numbers. I can't see any other doors at first glance. A fusillade of lasbolts streams towards me, and I duck back quickly. We have to get inside, Guzman's wheezes. Suggestions welcome, I snarl back, unslinging the assault laser and unleashing a storm of lasbolts past the head poking around a buttress, jutting from the wall to my right. Peering around the room again, I see someone walk into the chamber along a metal gantry hanging 5 meters or so across the floor. He's dressed in the worker coveralls that seem so common around here, and I can see he's got 2 auto pistols, one in each hand, more ammo clips thrust into his belt. I give a gasp of shock as he opens fire with the pistols, spraying bullets into the back of the Typhons, cutting down half of them in the first hail of fire. As they turn to look up at this new threat, I push myself toward firing wildly with the assault laser. I can hear the colonel's bolt pistol thudding just behind me as he follows. Las bolts ricochet off the metal mesh of the gantry as the stranger vaults over the rail, still firing with his free hand. Caught between the attack on 2 fronts, the guardsmen are dead in a matter of seconds. Everyone in here! Schaefer calls back, and I look down the corridor to see Stridon and Lori coming back. A Typhon appears at the far end, but is sent scurrying by the salvo of bolts from Lorden. Our mysterious accomplice, I presume, Lori says, inspecting a newcomer, where he stands looking down the corridor, reloading the auto pistols. Last chancers, the colonel says, waving a hand towards the stranger. May I introduce the man we are currently fighting for, Inquisitor Oriel. Fuck. It's like a sweet. It's almost as sweet as Hawaiian Punch. So I know the sugar hangover is gonna be fucked up. They seem to be holding back, calls Lauren from the gaping hole of the doorway to the plasma chamber. Their officers are probably cursing the architects of Court Norum at the moment, says Inquisitor Oriel, pushing the auto pistols into the belt of his coveralls. He is clean shaven, with a narrow face and thin black hair. He exudes an aura of calm, tinged with a hint of menace. The whole inner circle is designed to be a final bastion of defense, which works for our favor now, not theirs. It's what makes this whole mission possible. I can see his point. The plasma chamber is octagonal, about 20 meters from wall to wall. There are a few freestanding display panels still littered with dead typhons, and power cells snaking from apertures in the walls to a certain terminal on the wall opposite the entrance, shielded from view by a huge data screen. The access way is 4, maybe 5 meters wide, almost impossible to come down more than 4 abreast, and 30 meters long at least, a real killing zone. The Inquisition? Says Lori, still dumbfounded. She's crouched next to Cronin, who's slouched against the wall, still out of it. He's barely alive. The last blast caught him full in the chest. Makes sense, I say. Who else would have the resources or authority to destroy a sector base? It will not be long before they try another attack, the colonel tells us, calling us back to the matter at hand. Guardsmen, link in and start the overload. Revered Inquisitor, how many ways into this chamber are there? Just the main gate and the entrance duct I came through, the maintenance duct I came through, he says, pointing to the gantry above our heads. That's why we can hold them off with just a handful of men. What about the duct? I ask, casting a cautious glance upwards. I left a little surprise just outside for anyone who tries to come in that way. He reassures me with a grim smile. You've changed, says the colonel, glancing at the Inquisitor, taking us a bit aback. I'm surprised they've seen each other before. But then again, I guess I shouldn't be. Between the Inquisitor and the captain of the Twins Penal Battalion, I suspect the colonel has been out and about a lot more than we realize. Oh, the beard. I required a change of identity once the command staff learned who I was, he tells us. It was the easiest way, that and a suitable alter ego as a maintenance worker. Something's happening, calls Lauren, drawing our attention to the corridor outside. I can see some movement to the far end, heads popping into sight to check what's going on. Mass attack? Lori asks, taking up a fighting position next to the gateway. The bulky bolter held across her chest. There are no other options, it seems, the colonel agrees. Then shouldn't we be building a barricade or something? Suggests Dryden, thumbing more shells in the breech of his shotgun. One way in, one way out, points out Lori, jabbing a thumb back down the access corridor. When it's time to go, we need to get out fast. I never thought about getting out, Stryden admits, pointing a hand across his sweat-slicked hair. Getting in seemed ridiculous enough. You don't even have to be here, I snap at him. So quit complaining. The attack is heralded by a storm of fire along one side of the corridor. Last fire and deadly hail that rips along the wall impacts into the doorway and comes flaring into the plasma chamber. As if we're pinned back by the covering fire, a squad of guardsmen charges up along the other side of the access way, bellowing some kind of war cry. The colonel and I toss a couple of frag grenades through the doorway, and the war cry turns to shouts of panic. Bits of shrapnel sigh through the door, and the blast fills the passage. As the smoke clears, I look around the edge of the doorway and see the Typhons in a pile of twisted corpses, caught fully by the blast, as some of them tried to turn back and ran into the others behind them. Score 1 to the last chancers, laughs Lori. peeking above my shoulder for a look. How many do we need to win? I ask her, and she shrugs. Of the 3.5 million people left on Of the 3.5 million people left at Coronorum, the Inquisitor tells us from the other side of the doorway, 700,000 are fully trained guardsmen. That's how many we need to score. 7,100,000? I spit. How the frag are we supposed to get out? When the plasma reactors go to overload, getting out is going to be the matter on everyone's mind, Cage. The colonel answers from beside Oral. They will not be too keen to stand and fight when that happens. Good point. Well made, agrees Lauren. The only fighting we'll be doing is over seats on the shuttle. Another attack is being launched by Imperial forces in the northern walls, the Inquisitor adds. They have 2 fronts to fight on. What happens to our men when this place goes boom, asks Lauren. Our banter is cut short by a succession of distinctive whump noises, and 5 fist-sized shapes come bouncing down the plasma room. Fracking grenade launchers! Lori cries out, pushing me flat and throwing herself across Cronin. The grenades explode, shrapnel clinging off the walls, a small piece embedding itself in my left forearm. Another volley comes clattering in, and I roll sideways, putting as much distance as I can between me and the entrance. More detonations boom in my ears, and debris rings across the equipment around us. Are you trying to blow up the reactor? Oriole bellows down the corridor. There's a pause in the firing, and the Inquisitor looks up at us and smiles. Well, they don't know what we're trying to do anyway, he chuckles. They'll be wary of any heavy weapons from now on. Sometimes you just fuck, that's really sloppy and shitty. It's awful. Sometimes you just need a few good men. You just need a few good men sometimes. What does that mean? It's a few good men willing to die. In the next half hour, they tried 5 more attacks. The bodies of more than 100 men are piled in the corridor now, each successive wave being slowed by the tangles of corpses to clamber across. A muffled explosion from above, just before the last attack, indicated someone trying to come in through the maintenance duct and running to the Inquisitor's booby trap. It's been quiet for the past 15 minutes or so. Gudsman's is still plugged into the plasma reactor, face waxing, almost death-like. He sat there in a trance. I did wonder if he had died, but Laurie checked him, and he's still breathing. Who knows what sort of private battle he's fighting with the other tech priests inside the terminal network. We are running low on ammo. I had to ditch the assault laser, which stopped working during the 4th assault. I must have used up my 1,000 shots. I got one of the spare bolters now, a big lump of metal that weighs heavily in my hands, a complete contrast to the lightweight lasgun I'm used to. I can't see what they can try next, asks Lauren. Oh, frag, I mutter when I realize one of the options left to them. What now? The colonel demands, casting a vehement glance at me. Gas, I say shortly. No damage to the reactor, but we all be dead or asleep and defenseless. They can't use normal gas weapons, Oriel informs us. The ventilation of each circle is sealed to prevent an agent from being introduced from the outside, but it also means that any gas will be dispersed into the surrounding corridors. It's another of the defense features working against them. I've heard of short life viruses, Stryden points out. We had a few warheads on the Emperor's Benevolence. They're only deadly for a few seconds. A base the size of Court Norm might have something like that. Yes, they did, Inquisitor Oriel confirms me with a grin. Unfortunately, their stockpile seems to have been used up by someone. 3-minute intermission. Before I finish my mission. I hate the rain. 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 Hate the